But Ted said, is Grayson a better overall player than Beal based on his defensive abilities? So I don't want to necessarily talk about like comparing the two, but let's compare as far as, because what they brought up on the podcast was, can Beal really take this offense to the next level? Because it's already pretty much at the highest of the highs with Book and KD. But defensively, do you lose something inserting Bradley Beal in there instead of like a Grayson Allen type? That was the question that was posed.
I don't think that they're at the highest of the highs yet. I still think that they're still only 13 games into this season with a whole bunch of new parts. They're going to figure some more things out, and their offense is going to become even more efficient. Then to add Bradley Beal in that's just so disrespectful to Bradley Beal. Like, I know he gets hurt, but I feel like we have very much recency bias when it comes to Bradley Beal in terms of his injuries and not realizing he is at full strength. He is one of the best guards in the NBA, and his offensive output is going to far exceed any lack of defense when it's in comparison to Grayson Allen. And it's, yeah, sure, he's not as good of a defender as Grayson Allen, sure, but he's far more superior than Grayson Allen when it comes to the offensive side of the ball at every single level. So I just cannot take that seriously.
I don't want to take anything away from Grayson because he's been a solid 13-5 in his role. Like,
you all know I'm all in on Grayson.
Yeah, and he's been like a top 5 3-point shooter this season, which I don't think Beal's going to shoot 50% from three. Could be wrong on that, but Grayson's been fantastic. But defensively, even if you look at some of the games he's had, Grayson has not been tremendous on that end. Like there was a couple games against the Lakers where D'Angelo Russell was getting to his spots against him. I think plugging Beal into either one of his spots with Eric Gordon or Grayson Allen, it's the defensive drop-off's not going to be that extreme, especially because they're not a great defense right now. They were to start the season. Since then, they're 20th in defensive rating. And just what you gain offensively in terms of his driving ability, his ability to cut off the ball as a spot-up shooter, and just being more of a gravity hub. Because as much as Grayson is a tremendous shooter, defenses are not going to, like look at him the same way they look at Beal. They're not going to throw double teams at Grayson. They're going to it's going to be an impossible pick and choose situation when Beal is out there, especially with those other two. He's a guy that can ground bench units as well. You can't really say that about Grayson. So the offensive ceiling raises a lot when Beal's out there.
When you saw last night with KD and Book, just KD and Book, you saw how much attention Utah was trying to have towards those two guys and throwing double teams basically at each guy every single time. And there was even a possession that went between Book and KD multiple times before KD got an open three. That's the kind of stuff we're talking about. Now you add Bradley Beal on the opposite side to that as a cutter or even as a mid-range or a shooter or even ball handler, and that changes the entire game. Like we can't de-emphasize that. Like, and people are trying to, and I don't understand that. Like, I get we haven't seen it yet, and I get you don't logically know how this is going to work, and I get that. But we've seen this before, and we've brought it up before when it comes to the Warriors with Steph, Klay, and KD. Now, Bradley Beal is not Klay Thompson from a shooting perspective, but he is better than Klay Thompson in terms of driving to the basket, drawing contact at the rim, and also the mid-range jumper. Like, you can't knock Bradley Beal for that. And so I get it. He's injured, and it's hard to understand what this is going to look like. But I don't agree with the assessment that they would lose as much as they would gain on the offensive or defensive side with Bradley Beal in comparison to Grayson Allen, because that's just, you're disrespecting Bradley Beal, a guy who averaged 30 points a game or more in 2 seasons in the last 5 years. Like, come on, guys.
Can I add some more context to this? Because I was doing the research for KD's streak, and he also had a streak with the Nets with 25-plus points to start the season for 17 games. He broke Bradley Beal's record, who was at 16. So Brad Beal's one of those guys. Like, he can put it in like that.
How much better can this offense get, though? Because 9 of their games this season, they've scored 114 or more points. So at some point, there's only going to be so many shots available. And yes, can they clean up their turnovers? Could Bradley Beal potentially help with that? Sure. But how much more is there to grow in this offense? What's the ceiling in terms of that? Because they've scored an insane amount already. And that's at times without Devin Booker out there also. So, I mean, efficiency maybe, but is this a team that we're now talking they're pushing 120 a night if Bradley Beal is out there, maybe pushing 130 on some nights, which we've seen on multiple occasions already. Like, that's my biggest question is how much more is there to grow? I think defensively, you put Bradley Beal in place of Eric Gordon or Grayson Allen, and I don't think you're going to have a huge drop-off in that starting lineup defensively. But
I would say this in terms of the ceiling comment. The ceiling to me is like a goal. And, somebody once told me goals should just be guidelines. They shouldn't be the end result. Because if you do that, then you're placing a cap on what you're trying to get accomplished. And you don't even know if there's anything more to accomplish, right? And we saw this in the late 90s, early 2000s. Basketball was kind of at a standstill, for lack of a better word. Scores were in the 90s, the 80s, sometimes the 70s. And then what happened? You brought in the Phoenix Suns with Steve Nash and changed the entire game. You don't know what is possible until you see it out there in person. And I would wager to bet that you're looking at another 10 points per game at a minimum if Bradley Beal's on that lineup, because some of those lineups are obviously when they go to the bench and they're alternating between KD and Beal. I mean, KD and Book. Now you're going to be able to throw Beal in with one of those two at all times. So you might have two guys on that court pulling that gravity no matter what, and then you add the third guy in, and it just makes it even better. So that's I see where you're going with this in terms of how far they can go, but I still think that there's plenty of room to improve.
But is it more the floor raises than necessarily where you're not going to have a 95-point game like we've seen? I mean, is that? I don't know. I know their offensive rating as of right now is 9th, according to NBA.com. So
it is, but I think it raises both, to be honest with you, because I think if you look at it, they're 9th, but since it's so early in the season, there are a lot of teams that have really high offensive rate. Like last year, the Kings had the highest offensive rating in NBA history at 118.6. Right now, the Suns are 9th, and they're at 116, basically. So they're not far off where the greatest offense in NBA history was last year. And as seasons continue to go on, we're going to see that number rise and rise. But I feel like the fact that they've put that kind of offensive rating up, with Beal only playing 3 games, with Book only playing, 4 or 5 now, like once they get all 3 of those back, I think it raises it another level, because it's not just about adding another, 20, 25 points per game score out there. It's how much easier do the looks become for Grayson, for Gordon, for Yuta, for Nurkic rolling even, if you have to worry about, okay, we're sending a double at Book, but now he swung it to KD, so we need to rotate there, but also double KD. Now we need to rotate more. Like, they're going to have defenders in a tailspin, I think. So, they need to stay healthy. Obviously, Book and KD will need to stay healthy. Beal will need to get healthy for them to get there, but greatest offense in NBA history is not that far out of reach from where I'm sitting.
But the last 3 games since, Book's been back and been Book, they're averaging 134.7 points per game.
Yeah.
4 more points than the closest team. That's where I'm like, are we talking they're going to be at 140? Like,
more, Espo. We want more.
It's
more.
insane.
More.
And one of those was against the NBA's top-ranked defense.
More passion.
Yeah,
more
like
energy. More passion. No? Nobody else? Thank you. I'm glad at least one person here understands. TikTok, of course.
Oh, so not like a real thing, just a...
No, it's a real thing.
So,
it's real life online, Gerald.
All right. Okay. My bad.